All right, good morning, everyone. We're getting close to having quorum, very close.
Morning.
All right, well, we have quorum. I don't see where to claim the host key, but the recording is automated, so we're fine there. Normally it's, if I select myself in the participant list, it's there, but I don't see it. All right, so I have the agenda up. Are there any other additions to the agenda? Anything else? Anything anyone else wants to bring forward?
Joe, I just made you the host. Sorry, I had logged in as OPI host instead of myself earlier.
Okay, and I can't claim it out from under you. No problem.
I just made you the host, so you're host now.
Okay, yeah, you could be host. I mean, it's fine. I guess I didn't notice that on the list.
Yeah, when I download the videos and in order to post them to YouTube, I've got to log in as OPI host.
Okay. All right. So this is my agenda item. I want to go through what I showed at the board, or most of what I showed at the board. And then VinCat went through the lab vendor selection, and the governing board approved the selection of Hurricane Electric for hosting and managing. There's the other places that were looked at without any details about them or the bids, because that's the only semi-private thing we do. And definitely thanks to VinCat and the rest of the team for driving that process and completing it. So of course now we're going to have to start selecting and purchasing equipment, get it installed and get it running, and get it running with the components that we've defined, and then the use cases that are being worked on. All right, so any additions to the agenda or any questions on the lab?
Joe, this is Paul. The only question I've got on the lab is I'm still waiting on a few folks to get us the part numbers. So a couple of the vendors to provide part numbers and server specs that are required for their particular TPU.
Yep, exactly. That, and then we need to do a call for donations, and then we need to do a call for, and then we need to do here's exactly what we want to buy in the first round, and that's enough to run whatever set of things we decide to run. So that'll be the next set of things to do for the lab.
Yep.
And so we'll have to pick a set of things to run, pick the lab equipment for it, et cetera, et cetera. Any other comments or questions? All right. So let's say congratulations again to VinCat on a successful process. That was very good. Okay. So let me show most of what I talked to the board about on Monday morning. Let me share that screen. Okay, so here's what I showed them. The stuff 4 and down, I don't. That's just sort of my personal backup. Let me make this to where you can actually see it better. All right, how's that for size?
Perfect.
All right. So DPU SIG has been formed and is now running. It's mostly an education and marketing, although it does want to run test cases and software lab. So I'm co-chairing it with Stephen and Juan from StorageX. They talked me into it. So makes liaison easy. and outreach easy, but it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And maybe there's lab collaboration we can propose there. So Paul, I need to sit down with you or come into the outreach meeting and talk about that, or we can talk about it here. What do we want to do with the DPU SIG? Once we have nailed down a little bit more of what we're going to do, I'll see how much of that I can bring directly in here. So,
Okay.
And talk about it, but I can definitely talk about the general ideas and where we could collaborate between SNEA and Linux Foundation on this. All right. And just raise your hand, or just, we have few enough people and everyone's very polite, just interrupt if you want to make a comment or ask a question. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Just a question, Joe. What is the DPU SIG talking about as their initial focus areas? What are they thinking about?
It's a whole ton, basically a whole ton of educational sessions at shows and so on.
I see. Bringing DPU knowledge to the SNEA audience?
Yeah, that's it. Well, SNEA audience and wider audience.
Sure.
I'll pop. Yeah, that's it. Like I say, so we haven't agreed on more. There's no, right now we're not talking about writing any specification of any kind. And of course, I'll advocate that stay in OPI, that the specification should stay in OPI.
Yeah, and if they see any needs, the things that need to be addressed, they should bring it to OPI.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's right. when we see needs that need to be addressed, we will bring it to ourselves, or I'll bring it here, which means we'll bring it to ourselves. It's kind of a useful thing. But like I say, we had exactly one meeting, so we'll get things squared away on what SNEA should help drive, as opposed to what OPI is driving. And we don't want to, we definitely, I mean, I clearly don't want to step on any toes in either direction, right? So we can coordinate that. So Dash is the next topic I should bring up. I propose that it's time now to do a formal outreach to Dash. In particular, since they have P4 for specifying DPU functions and sonic networking with extra tunnel termination being defined and a bunch of test cases being defined. And, many of the member companies here are also members of Dash. So I think that outreach will be fairly straightforward as well. The comment I got back was, the Dash collaboration needs to be two-way. And then the question was asked in the board meeting of what does that mean? What would the collaboration look like? And then the fact that it should be two-way, and we shouldn't, over define, define on top of what the other one's doing. And we're probably at the point where we have to do that. We have enough, and Dash definitely has enough. Now their swim lane has been fairly narrow so far, but that's why we need to open up that conversation. Comments, questions? Is anybody participating enough in Dash that they want to take the lead on that? I mean, in the absence of anyone, I'll do it, and I'll help. If somebody else wants to kind of drive it, I'll help them.
Yeah, Joe, I can, or we can co-drive sometimes. We have to balance the workload, but I can definitely help. Somebody else also wants to pick up, it at least helps both of us or someone else. So a couple of comments on why we should be working with them, though. I like the model of infrastructure as code. So now even compliance as code nowadays, everything is as code, so that it can be kind of replicated, moved, and whatnot. So how that relates to Dash is their specific. When you say Dash, the specification is in the P4. And then P4, it's verifiable. There are some really nice attributes that come with it. And then it becomes a single source of truth. And then it's easy for somebody to look at and say, my implementation is compliant or not. The second thing that we can really get out of some of the work there is the behavioral model. Makes it easy for us to do a software only implementation quickly, and then test a whole bunch of things. That really helps move a whole lot of things. And the third is actually it auto generates the APIs and things like that. So there is quite a bit of work going on in multiple projects apart from Dash, right? On how the API, once you have the specification, how SI, which is a fixed functional API, suddenly becomes an extendable API for a programmable infrastructure. So there's some really cool things they are doing, and it's something that we ought to look at, for sure.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts or comments on Dash, or anyone else want to work on this? On starting the discussions with them. All right. Well, we'll get that started, and then we'll pick people up as we go, which is fun. Yeah, go ahead.
From an outreach committee perspective, does anyone have contacts at Microsoft that would be interested?
Dan?
Sorry, I was on double mute. I didn't realize. Yeah, I wanted to volunteer Intel and to help with Dash as well.
All right. All right. So we'll set up a separate call to brainstorm about exactly how to approach it, or plan exactly how to approach it. I don't know if that'll be Monday or something, but we'll do a call before the next TSC meeting to get that rolling.
And Joe, real quick on the, would this be the right approach in the right context to see if Microsoft is interested in joining OPI?
Yeah, we can ask them at the same time.
Okay.
If they want to formally join. I mean, we have participation. We have participation now, but just like Dell, that's a big place, or Intel or HPE, they're big places, and but so core company, yeah, we can ask them if they want to join formally, because as part of that. And so, Paul, you should be included as well in this, right?
Sure.
All right. So, all right. So we'll get that rolling. I told him that we're having. I related that we're having Linux Foundation take over the website using WordPress, and there was no dissent on that. There was agreement on that. And then I said we've got a list of 4 good sort of use case proposals, as opposed to individual component proposals, which are all good, rolling. And that was everyone was happy about that. I explained that our current hot technical areas were what to do about network operating system, the network use cases and value, and really that comes for L3 overlay and local switching, and then some stuff with the repro structures related to the proposals. And I have a couple of follow-up things in our agenda list to go through there. And then lifecycle and provisioning. I basically told the board, yeah, we have to have, for this part, we absolutely have to have full participation from all the server and DPU vendors. Because, that output is really important. And it's a combination of specification for the boot sequencing in the various use cases, and coupled to anything we need changes physically for PCIe, or in the logic that's built into to, whatever generation of DPU we can intercept. But we really need to cover all of the use cases, because we actually have several that are disjoint. I mean, they're all involve DPU booting, but we know we have several use cases, and we really do need to pursue those in parallel, I think. Although, the lifecycle and provisioning group is working through the details of that very nicely. So the call on Tuesday was very good. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think this is going really well. My only concern, and this came from some other folks at Intel that hopefully will come to the meeting and present on some more details. But the current proposals are really really focused on this boot sequencing issue around where some devices aren't PCIe compliant, and that's really just one part of what we need to do for lifecycle and provisioning. There's a lot of other topics like handling power and being able to handle thermals and things like that. That to have a complete proposal, we haven't had time to go and address those. So some folks on the Intel side have volunteered. I don't think they're going to be able to get there next week, but to come in and talk about some of the other super important aspects of DPU, IPU provisioning and lifecycle that we just haven't gotten to because we've been so focused on this boot sequencing issue, which at least for the IPUs that it has been resolved, but now we've kind of stepped away from, instead of, hey, this is lifecycle and provisioning for a DPU and IPU. Now it's sort of like, hey, this is a workaround we need for certain devices
Right.
that are not PCI compliant. So that's a concern that we need to balance it. We need to come back to the general case.
Agree. And if we had a list and a little bit of description for all of the areas, right? So if the markdowns that are there don't cover additional areas, either propose an edit to them or create another markdown and put that in as a pull request so we can do written comments on it for any additional areas that are going to have to be covered, even if they haven't been addressed yet. Basically put a pin in, hey, we got to deal with this by the time we're done with all of the server integration and aspects of the DPUs and IPUs. We need to be done with, or here's all the things we need to be done. Sorry, I'm a little tongue tied.
Absolutely, yeah. I will push them harder to go faster, but
No.
I'll
So
try to get that list out of them first. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Yeah. So we just want the list to make sure we have scope defined, and then we can decide. We can't do everything at once, right? So we can decide what order to tackle the scope in, and I think we're going to come in with a list of kind of a catalog of all the use cases and why that's the spanning subset of all the use cases. So maybe by next week we'll have that kind of overview of all of the cases based on our experience, in addition to the detailed work of the individual boot sequences. And so if you had a list as well, then we could merge them and have kind of a complete picture of what has to be defined. And this is kind of in our with our specification standards defining organization SDO hat on, as opposed to our open source hat. So kind of an interesting project that we have all these hats. All right, any other comments or questions on anything? All right, and then I just highlighted that since last month Dan is the representative from Intel. Otherwise, this slide is exactly the same. And then this slide is you guys know the content here, but this is the current structure. as of March 9th anyway.
Okay, so would we at what point would we start transitioning the TSC from members who have paid the dues, like the board, into based on participation? I remember it was supposed to be like a year out, but that feels really soon to make that transition.
Yeah, I don't recall. I don't know. Does anyone recall from the charter documents what that is? I don't recall off the top of my head.
At some point in the future, when the TSC decides to do so, is kind of what the charter documents say. I don't. We all talked about, yeah, let's do it in a year, but it wasn't codified anywhere.
Okay. All right, I'll take that. Okay, let me. So any questions on the repositories and so on? Now, there was a discussion of the repo, a little bit of a discussion of the repo structure, and we've had that internally, and our current POC efforts and use case efforts are going to go into the OPI POC directory initially, but what we're going to need is to decide and agree on how the repo structure cleanly supports. Here, let me switch back to how the repo structure cleanly supports quote releasing the use cases, or allowing someone to to grab the code and cleanly build and not get overwhelmed by 500 repositories. On the other hand, not having shared ownership of a repo from a maintainer point of view that really ought to be separate from the rest. So that's the balance we're trying to drive right now, as Boris explained last time. And again, if anybody has a good idea of how this should be structured, because there are pros and cons on both sides, and I haven't had anyone come forward and say, every little thing should have its own repo and have huge number of repos, versus, yeah, we just put it all in one and deal with it that way. There's a balance in between, and independent components that have independent maintainers is kind of where the balance point is now, with the exception of the POC work going into the POC directory initially, so that we don't proliferate until we know what should be a separate repo. But I'm willing to take any thoughts and suggestions there. So Keith, and then Dan.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would just say, as soon as you go to more than one repo, you just have to support this. It's a very important use case, right? You have multiple pull requests that each of them belong to a different repo that need to work together as a bundle, right? From a CI/CD perspective, right? So that problem is a difficult problem to solve, and it needs to be solved, right? So I'm just putting that down, that as soon as you go to more than one repo, you got to solve that problem. And if people have a good solution for that, that's great. But otherwise, you basically have to develop a layer on top of Git to bundle a bunch of pull requests that need to go in an atomic manner. So I'm just saying that that's a non-trivial problem to solve.
All right. Yeah, excellent comment. Dan, and then Stephen.
I was just going to mention that we have been struggling with the problem of how to put onto the repo the vendor device implementation agnostic code in a way that if a person did have a system with the vendor agnostic SDK or the vendor specific SDK on it, that they could do that without us having to put that SDK into the repo or into the build system. So I think we have something interesting, but coming soon. But this has been an issue that we've been working on for the last several months. So I hope that we can bring this into OPI and propose it as a potential solution to that particular problem, which is that, you know, it's going to be difficult to go and you know, mix the NDA streams and, you know, put people's SDKs into the GitHub. That just seems like it's going to be really difficult. So we think we have a solution.
Okay.
And you know, we want to share that and get feedback and see what people think about it.
Yeah. Again, if you have a proposal for how to solve that, you know, I think that would be of great interest to everyone. If you have some idea of how to solve that problem, and then, you know, the multi-repo build problem. I get that one as well, Keith. And Stephen, you're up.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to Keith. And just as Boris said, you know, the last time this came up, you know, we have some ability to deal with that already. We have the ability to share CI code between repos without duplicating it. And so we have the ability to, you know, automatically run, you know, portions of the CI from one repo and another repo. And we do that as a way to mitigate that issue.
Is the idea of how that works in a note somewhere in one of the markdown files?
I don't think so. I think it's just in the code.
Yeah, maybe we could, yeah, and Keith did a thumbs up, excellent. You know, maybe we could have just a few notes on how that works and then link people to that. Because we have a couple of examples, or maybe we just point people to the example, say, hey, you know, we know we have multiple repos. When you want to go build, you know, X, you know, you go here and just follow this code and you'll see how it works, or something like that, or just do a really brief guide to where to look to see how that works or something. You know, I don't want to write a novel because no one will read a novel, but sometimes those little how-tos and tutorials on how a piece works, keys, you know, give somebody the key to go follow the code.
Yep.
All right, cool. All right. So boot specification, all things we talked about. The active use cases, buildable POCs, demonstrate common object. Okay, we've talked about that. Repro structure for clean releases and so on, we've talked about that. Any other topics related to any of those things? And that was kind of the discussion with the board as well. Those were follow-ups and topics that were, you know, came up. They were saying we think detail in these areas would be valuable. Okay, any other discussion or topics on anything we've talked about so far? Okay. New proposals that participating companies are looking to bring forward. So is there a list of, do we have a list of new proposals that people are proposing or thinking about doing?
I can get that as part of my other AR for provisioning. I think we'll come back with that list for
Sure.
provisioning. It's almost like we should almost have, maybe it doesn't need to be done in the use case group, but we should have, you know, lifecycle and provisioning related use cases. Like instead of saying, hey, we're working on a boot sequence, really the use case is being able to boot or provision the host from the IPU DPU. You know,
Yeah,
that's a use case, right? And so that we should be tracking it at that level, you know, and you know, that type of stuff, like being able to make sure that you thermal manage a higher power device. You know, that's not really specific to IPU DPU, but that becomes a use case as well, is to make sure that you can minimize the power usage across the system
Mhm.
based on the fact that you have a slightly higher power device, and you have to balance using more fans versus keeping that higher power device cool. So these types of things, I think it'd be better to bubble them up to that level of use case, as opposed to saying, hey, this is what you like baseline generic have to do to get a DPU IPU in your system. I don't think it's that. I don't think that is as compelling. Like, oh, why would I do all this work? Oh, why do I need to do that? So I think when I work on that list for provisioning, I like to try to bump it up to that level.
Mhm.
And I do think also we have a couple other proposals in the networking space that we haven't shared yet around P4. So I think that's an important piece of the better integration of IPDK and OPI is the use of this P4 control plane specifically for networking. It underpins our other recipes like IPsec and Kubernetes, and I think there's a way to make the P4 more or less optional, but it's an important piece of how we're doing those recipes. So I think those are probably two areas that Intel is actively working on, trying to bring that to OPI. It just has been taking time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good discussion. Although, I mean, I view the boot stuff as sort of a three-part thing, right? One is actually writing boot specification. Here's the behavior you have to have in the following different scenarios. The second one is the use case, which is kind of a level up, how to use that boot specification to do some particular lifecycle and provisioning job. And then the third one is, what things do we need to push to other SDOs because DPUs are different than most of the devices that have come before. And is there anything we need to push into PCI, SIG, or CXL, for example? So that's really the three kinds of output that come. So I agree with you, Dan, although the boot specification in and of itself is valuable as just, hey, here's how this works, or here's how this needs to work to be compliant. That's what most SDOs stop there, but we have a kind of a bigger mission to help build the DPU ecosystem as a consortium. So
I think we need to figure out that third scenario, how that would even work. So I think you could even talk about this in the abstract at a high level. It's sort of, if there's a dependency, like we can't, we have to avoid the situation where we can't, close our boot, our lifecycle and provisioning spec with that spec head on without some change from some other organization. Then I think that feels like a no-go, right? Like we're basically blocked by some other organization's process. So I think we probably should have to find a way to be able to specify our own sequence or function without any changes, and then come back and say, well, okay, well, if we get this other change, then we can make XYZ improvements.
That's what we have to.
We have to make sure that it's dead bug free.
Yeah, that's what we have to. So again, the current ones will have to deal with the situation as it is today, and then as a separate activity, we should say, if we had this set of changes, the boot would be a lot better, right? Or we say, look, DPU vendors, you have to comply to this part of the PCI spec because that's what's causing the problem. But we'll get there. Okay. Anything else from anyone? I mean, the ones we have in flight now are all good, so those should be pursued. This was just a forward-looking, hey, anything coming that would be that we should have a heads up on. And then Mark dropped. I was going to ask on the API group, but I'll ask him separately, and we can talk about that another time. All right. Any other topics from anyone on anything that we ought to be that we need to go agree on, / vote on, or new area we need to bring in? I mean, I'm happy with the way the working groups are working now. So, progress is being made in all 4 of them. And I'm happy with the, member companies bringing in actual use cases, and it's a variety of them. And we're going to learn, a lot about how easy and difficult it is to do these things from those use cases being brought in. And some of them involve, a proprietary code that wants to sit on top and leverage the rest of OPI. Some are full open source, integrating as a sort of a complete deliverable using OPI components. Some of them are, again, just subsets of DPU behavior. So, like I said, I'm happy with all of the variety of use cases that we're trying to go after. All right. Any other comment or thoughts from anyone? Because I didn't have any other topics today, or anything to tee up for a future meeting. I mean, I want to get Verizon back in here to go back through their requirements. They said, hey, can we wait till March? And it's now the middle of March. So I'll ask Verizon if they're ready to come back in and have as much time as they need to walk through their requirements and discuss them. So I'll do that as well. But anything else? Okay. So with that, I think we can close the meeting. And again, if something occurs to you offline, we have Slack, and you can always target an individual or the right Slack channel, and we can discuss it there, or use that to ask for a direct call and discuss it there, and then we can bring in kind of the proposal or result to one of the working groups or to this TSC call. All right. If there's nothing else, then I will terminate the meeting. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Joe.